So on July 4th, 2026, we'll be celebrating the 250th birthday of the United States of America. And as we think about the future of the country, the role of education will play a pivotal hand in guiding our destiny over the course of the next 250 years. But to bring things a little closer to home, I want to start with 10 years from now. If this group were getting back together and we were out at the bar or coffee shop and we were raising a glass, toasting the state of education in America, I want to know what each of you would be celebrating if you could see that accomplished in 10 years' time. And I actually want to start with Pastor Corey Brooks, because he's walking across America right now, literally, between New York and Los Angeles. It's going to take you about a year to do.
Right.
This isn't the first kind of big, I don't want to call it a stunt, but bold action. He was up on a rooftop throughout the entire winter in Chicago to raise money for a project. And While You're Walking has a lot to do with education and the outcomes we're seeking to achieve on the south side of Chicago. So I just want to kick things off to you to start.
First, I'm honored to be here and with such great thinkers and leaders. It's a privilege to be in the presence of Dr. Arnn always. If 10 years from now we were together and we were able to celebrate something, I would be hopefully celebrating the fact that school choice has prevailed. I think one of the things that's hindering inner city students is the fact that they are regulated to go to these schools that are failing them. I just had the opportunity this week to go by a school here in DC, Dunbar, which was a school in the early 1900s. It was a school where doctors, lawyers, it was a great place. People from all across America would send their black kids, their children, to this school. And now, after the Brown versus the Board of Education, the school started to slide backwards. And that school now has failing students who can't read, who can't do math, but they still have a 70% graduation rate, which is remarkable. But I would celebrate the fact that those young people don't have to go to a failing school just because of the policies. So my prayer is that 10 years from now, school choice, parents can send their kids to schools that perform, and children don't have to go to schools that are failing.
And what about the boys' school that you're trying to build?
So that's one of the reasons why on the south side of Chicago, the neighborhood that I'm in, it's called O Block. It's named after a young man named O.D. Perry, who was shot and killed. The gangs took the O in his name and started calling it O Block. It's actually Martin Luther King Drive, which is so crazy. But we decided to keep the O and call it Opportunity Block. And in the process of trying to create opportunities on this block where there is a 6% reading proficiency, a 4% math proficiency, we have decided, instead of waiting on government to come in and save the day, which they never do, we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to educate our children, specifically our boys who are participating in gang life and oftentimes without fathers present. They need a place where they can be educated. They need a place where they can be mentored. They need a place where they can see true masculinity. And so this school we're creating is going to be for boys. It's going to be a classical Christian school. And hopefully 10 years from now, we'll be celebrating some students who are doing a wonderful job.
Dr. Arnn, what are you celebrating in 10 years?
Well, there's so many things wrong that when you make the list of them, you have to think something central has gone wrong. So the central thing that's gone wrong is that we've given up on the idea of knowledge, of truth. In 10 years, we should be able to use the expression, the laws of nature and nature's God, and know what it means.
Jacob, you're doing something crazy in Steubenville. You've combined the liberal arts and kind of the Catholic intellectual tradition with the skilled trades. I think you have something like 70 students this year, freshman year.
Yeah, 2 classes of 30.
2 classes of 30, okay.
That's where we're at.
So what are you raising a glass to a decade from now?
Well, I think the preservation of the true philosophical exploration, I think is just critical. We found, this tension in the ancient world between those who are pursuing knowledge with no answers, and then the Gnostics coming in and saying, forget about philosophy. I mean, they were hesitant to ever use that term, right? Because they didn't want this endless hamster wheel cycle of trying to ask questions that never get us to the truth. And they would just say, they're Gnostics for a reason. They would just use the word gnosis to talk about knowledge instead. And I think there's this tendency for us in our society that is so obsessed with relativism and has taken this on to then find the pendulum swing to the other direction and just talk about hard and fast knowledge, to talk about power, to talk about dominion, but unreasonable dominion. I would like to see, in 10 years, a strong movement of Christians having dominion again that says both, that demonstrates both the grandeur as well as the tragedy of philosophy, of asking these questions, but ones that come to truth that is given to us by a God that actually does love us and wants to see society transformed. I want to see education come back to that marriage of reasoning and truth.
And do you foresee, the students that you're getting, I assume right now most of them are from some sort of religious background before joining. Do you foresee other, people from just other traditions or no tradition at all, like coming to seek you out to both learn the trades and learn, study liberal arts?
Maybe the case. Right now it is a Catholic student body. And I think in large part it's because people are desperate. I mean, those who are coming from this faith-based background have seen a resolution between this tension that our society is putting forward right now, and that they're the ones most aware that there is this resolution available, and when we're trying to provide it, it's enticing.
That's great. Jeremy, I want to go to you. You just celebrated your 10th anniversary at the Classical Learning Test, so I'm curious if you can look back 10 years. Where were we at in America when it came to classical education, and then looking for where are we now thanks to your work, and then 10 years from now, where do you see CLT going?
Sure, yeah, I think really big picture, there's a handful of kind of metrics that are measurable that I think point to a flourishing society. So these would be things like marriage rates, the divorce rate going down, birth rates, people having babies, vocations, people going into ministry, participation in civic life, church attendance, and we can measure these, and these need to be going in the right direction. Many of these we need to reverse right now. So I think big picture. I think in terms of CLT, we've got a 2040 goal of trying to displace the College Board, which we believe is the most powerful influencer in American education, with many of our best students being shaped by the AP curriculum. So we've given ourselves till 2040 to try to displace them.
Hurry that up, man.
Number one.
Just for us, would you?
That's the goal. It's a big ship to try to move.
Josh?
I will take Dr. Arnn's lead and say there is one overarching problem, and we'll come out in the same place, but I'll start from a different place. I think the single biggest problem facing America today, which is being nurtured in higher education and K through 12 as well, is the identity politics, innocent victimhood frame of mind. It is utterly poisoned higher education. I think it's poisoning our young people, because there's no way we can build a civilization if we're simply saying this group is innocent and this group is a transgressor. We have got to get rid of these scapegoat words which have dominated the left and dominated our higher education for the last 10 or 15 years. There can be no pursuit of knowledge unless we get rid of all that. So that'd be the first thing. And then the second thing, and it's consistent with what a number of you are doing here right now, I think we need to separate, and this is Alan Bloom's argument in The Closing the American Mind. Look, there is a place for elite education, but that everyone should be doing book learning is, I think, a terrible mistake. That's right. Tocqueville saw this in Democracy in America. You've got a nation that's built on practicality, hands-on experience, this invisible repertoire of knowledge that's necessary to build a civilization. That's not classroom stuff. And so I think we need to separate out and realize that, conclude that not everybody needs to go to college, or it doesn't have to be the college of the 4-year type. And we don't have enough plumbers, we don't have enough carpenters. We've got 100 million homes in America and we don't have enough people to fix them. Let's get back to the analog world for a huge swath of people. And then for those who are involved in, the higher education stuff, we have to get rid of the poison of identity politics.
Amen.
Yeah, and I don't see it happening in any of the universities. Georgetown is doubling down. Every university I know, with the exception of Hillsdale and a few others which never had it, they're doubling down on this. They're fighting the administration. The good news, I think, is that there's a generational change at Georgetown, and you'll all have to tell me if it's happening elsewhere. The young ones have come in. They've been overwhelmed with this identity politics stuff. They know it doesn't work. They're hungry. They're searching for something else. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to field enough professors who are committed to the sorts of things that Hillsdale's committed to be able to give them something else besides the identity politics stuff. So it's going to take a while to clear out, but that to me is the single most important thing.
There you go. And the toxicity of that, all you have to do is read the novel 1984, because if it's true that you're guilty of a thing that you did not intend, right, then what you've abolished is freedom. And in 1984, it's systematic, right? You have to learn doublethink. That means a thing can be true and not true at the same time. And until you can be taught to think that, you cannot be sufficiently obedient. So it's actual slavery. That's what those things mean. I mean, my younger daughter, who's a fancy architect now, she went to a very good college, I will say, without naming it. And they took her, and she transferred back to a better college where I happened to work. But they took her in this wonderful place. And on a Saturday, they took a dorm full of girls who are the nicest, middle America, smart, and they preached at them for 8 hours on a sunny day about the evil of their privilege. And they're obedient kids. It's a distinguished place. It's a Christian place, Catholic place. Anyway, she was horrified. And she calls me up at night, you see, and I said, well, what that's about is, I said, what do the others think? She said, everybody thought it was an ugly duty, right? But, you search your own conscience and ask yourself the question, are you a racist? If you answer that question, no, that's racism. So all these other things we talk about, your point is exactly right. If you think that driving out knowledge is the purpose, is the route to freedom, including knowledge of freedom has to be driven out. If you think that, then of course nobody will learn to read. Nobody will be energetic and working with his hands. It destroys everything. And that's what's going on. It's a totalitarian impulse, and it's proceeding. It's thrown back a little bit just right now, first time in my lifetime, but I mean in politics. But as you say,
I hear quite often people just wanting to give up on higher education as a whole, right? That the thing is compromise. It's become ideological. It's become Marxist. It's bunk. We need to figure out something else. And I look back at the sacred tradition that we come from and see that it was the church that founded the first colleges. It was the church that founded the first universities. And we set those up principally to allow those who had a principle, vocation towards the life of the mind to be able to populate their minds in wisdom that they might be able to tell the rest of the world about the order that is good and that we should be able to know, to enjoy, and then to utilize to prudentially instantiate the kingdom of God actually physically, concretely in the world amongst us, right? So there's the task of higher education that is there paired and married to the rest of society that needs it. And so when people say we just need to get rid of higher education, I think that is dangerous. That is disastrous even. Those are our institutions. Those are ours to reclaim. And that is why I'm so delighted to be with all of you.
If you're presented with the choice between keeping it as it is and getting rid of it, how would you choose?
Oh man, I can I not just say that's a false dichotomy, Dr. Arnn? You're doing something about that. I'm doing something about that. We're all doing something about that. You know, that this is something that is necessary.
In fact, we have.
You know,
I mean, looking at the grand world, we have abolished higher education because we have abolished the conception higher. And,
what a great insight. Yeah.
And remember, there's nothing to serve in these new doctrines except the new masters who convince you that X and not X are compatible. And once you learn that, in 1984, but all in Aristotle's Politics, Book 5, chapters 6, 7, and 8, the same argument makes, right? If you teach people that there's no reality, then you enroll them in the cause of defining reality, and that's just work for the powerful, right? If reality is made by us, that's why at Harvard and Columbia and such, they shout at each other all the time. I mean, some of them do. I mean, that's why they shot Charlie Kirk, because he disrupted that, because he just went and asked questions. And it's violent. And there, we've identified the central problem.
Can I add one other thing on this?
Yeah, go for it.
So I think it is a mistake to set up what's happened as once there was Christian and now we're secular. My view, it's Tocqueville's view. So Tocqueville, in the old regime of the French Revolution, he says the French Revolution was not a political revolution. It was an incomplete religious revolution. And his argument is that after Christianity, I'm going to come to your observation about Harvard, Yale, and the rest who taught the best and brightest, taught the theological leaders of our country. Tocqueville's incredible insight is that once Christianity falters, what you get is incomplete religions. And my view is that the French Revolution is the first one, communism is the second one, and identity politics is the third one. And Harvard and Yale and Princeton, they are now teaching the new priesthood, this identity politics stuff. We do have an established church in America. It is identity politics. And that absolutely has to change. One more quick thing. Since we've been talking about mediating institutions, families, and things like this. So the first, Tocqueville writes Democracy in America, and what is he worried about? The erosion of these mediating institutions. And since Nisbet wrote The Quest for Community in the 1950s, all the way through Putnam, there's been an understanding that the mediating institutions in America are being destroyed. In the African-American community, it was deliberate, I could say, and so you undermine the churches and the families, and what really do you expect? Bob Woodson and I have been working for years on this issue. So the first wave of the decomposition of these mediated institutions happens simply because of atrophy and progressivism. But identity politics is the second wave of the attack on it, because it says all of these things are heteronormative, right? There's the heteronormative family, the homophobic church. So identity politics, in my view, is the second wave of assault on these necessary mediating institutions. That's why it has to be purged. And we do have a priesthood coming out of Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Columbia, just as there always has been. It's just the priesthood of the incomplete religion of identity politics. That's why it is the central problem. And we can't get back to even understanding that there are things by nature until we can purge this postmodern disease of the mind, which is completely consuming not only North America, but Western Europe as well.
Mm-hmm. There's the energy behind the transgender movement right there, too.
Yes.
Because the word nature comes from the Latin word for birth, right? And that's in all those totalitarian novels, too. That's in Aristotle, too. If you can alter the human relationships in the family, then discipline goes, right? Mm-hmm. Then they can do anything to you, see? And right now, after enormous setbacks in the courts and in the president's executive orders, the Michigan Board of Education is near to passing right now a general instruction policy about transgender beginning in the third grade that requires no permission from parents. And they had a hearing the other night, I'm told, and it was 4 hours long. And they had to finally cut it off because there was still a queue of people. And the overwhelming majority were there to say, don't do this to my kid, right? And they're going to pass it anyway. They've done it before. But that, you see, if you think, as they genuinely think, that the path to freedom is that path, then of course, if you obstruct it, you're a slaver.
We hope you're enjoying Project Cosmos, conversations on the future of civilization. If you'd like more content like this, please like and subscribe or sign up for our newsletter, the Intercollegiate Review, in the comments section. So do you think what's going on in Michigan, curious Josh, is this a lag in the sense of this is still part of the old woke kind of energy making its way through everywhere, or is this sort of a vanguard in the sense that a lot of people are saying like we've beat identity politics, that's done, we knocked it out in 8 months, now we're on to the next thing.
It is not over. We have to understand this. It's still, Pete Hegseth is doing something to the military to clean it out. The courts, there's still a slim majority that would, I suspect, oppose it. But this has instantiated itself into every fissure of every institution in America. And it's going to take a very, very long time to clean it out. However, I think, so in my view, well, okay, the logic of identity politics is you start with the first innocent victim and then you keep extending it. And the case the left has made is civil rights goes to women's rights, goes to gay rights, goes to transgender rights. I have said to Bob Woodson and other conservative blacks, I've said, Black America alone could stop this by saying, no, you may not use our wound. You can talk about women's issues, but that is the argument that the left makes. They use the black wound and they extend it all the way. And the transgender, they're always looking for the next innocent victim. I think the transgender case, there are going to be a few diehards who are going to go right to the end of it. But I think it's beginning to lose, partly for the medical reasons, and I think that's the reason why the left has now become infatuated with the Muslims, right? So October 7th, and the kind of the new medical understandings, or with the awareness that no, this is really, really dangerous for children. I think the transgender issue is losing steam on the left, and they're realizing, except for the true diehards, that the next step is the Palestinians. And so I think that's the root of anti-Semitism on the left. And this is very, very interesting to watch because so many Jews have been committed to the left, and now they're realizing they're coming after me too. And that's the problem always in one of these totalitarian regimes. They eventually come after everybody, even the greatest defender. So I think the transgender issue is really on the verge of being lost, though Michigan and other states are going to still be crazy with it. But I think that's the reason why now there's so much pro-Palestinian / Hamas stuff.
It's a good insight. Your friend, Charlie Kirk, there's no doubt everybody recognizes that it was his outspoken conviction for the faith of Christ that is the motivating factor in his assassination, right? That everything else that he talked about was radiating from that. And so when you're comparing that to now the infatuation to a regime, the Islamic regime, that is not friendly towards the left at all, and that they would take advantage of it, is really telling. I think about this in terms of an insight that C.S. Lewis had about because grace builds upon nature. As soon as you start to rebel against Christ, you start to rebel against nature, which has been taken up from it. So before Christianity, marriage was between man and woman, right? There were problems, massive problems with it, polygamy, divorce, you name it, that were there. Christianity comes and says, what you have there that is good and natural. It's actually supernatural too. It's now elevated to this mode of a sacrament. And what have we seen now is that as we move into this more and more post-Christian world, marriage is being hacked at, thinking that it's purely a supernatural thing and not also a natural thing. And that just ends up leaving you without marriage. It leaves you individuated, isolated, alone, and often with blue hair.
Do you start with God and reason down, or do you start with the things around you and reason up? If you follow the order in C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity, or in Augustine too, you start with the things around you are real. That's a boy, that's a girl. That's a whatever that is. It's a coffee table and that's a sofa, and it's real. And then you start seeing that there's a hierarchy among the real things you can see. Now, I can tell you, Charlie, I watched him master that argument. And that it was beautiful. Erica, in her remarks at that thing, I sat there for 8 hours and watched the marvels unfold. Erica read 3 stories from his journals, which she had never read before he was killed. They're all notes on Aristotle class. And I happen to know where he got those. and so it was frustrating for people, because if you go in front of a bunch of uncommitted people and hostile people, which are the overwhelming majority of who he talked to on college campuses, and then there were the turning point people. They were converts, but they were always a minority. And if you go and you say, I believe in Jesus, and that's what tells me everything, and then somebody replies, that doesn't tell me anything, where do you go from that, right? You start at the bottom. You start at the things you can see. And like this, I had a naughty boy last year sitting at the table with me and 2 ugly boys and 3 pretty girls. And he decided he was going to taunt me, right? And he said, I've been thinking I'm a girl. And just like that, and I said, look around. I said, do you think you'll be very good at that? Because he isn't, he knows that. But that, you see, in other words, it isn't, the revival, it's certainly true, but your list that you gave, that's exactly right. We need more people getting married and having babies and going to church. And those 3 things kind of go in that order. Starts with what kind of life you're going to have. How are, we don't have the argument very much anymore at Hillsdale College, but when I first got there, we did. We don't have co-ed dorms, and they're visitation hours, and they got to leave. And of course, the argument was, I got a petition. I don't like petitions. It was, we should extend the visitation hours. I said, yeah, what you want them to go is from 6 in the morning till 5:55 the next morning. Is that what you want? Then we'll be arguing about that 5 minutes. And so I ended up for 2 or 3 years, and we got an honor code and it went away. I'm arguing with 19-year-olds about sex. And I would say, I've had the experience a time or two now of calling the home of a student and getting parents on the phone and saying, this is Larry Arnn, and they panic. And so even if everything's not okay, I always say, everything's okay, so I can talk to them. Now, do you realize that if you were any other kind of being, they would not know who you are? And you're 18, 19, 20 years old now, and they are deeply invested in your life. You're the most important thing on earth to them. How did you come to be? And you want me to endorse your just sleeping around? If you call a student and say, come into the office, there's a problem with your parents, you don't do that. You say, can you come talk to me for a minute? That's dramatic enough, right? But if then I got some news about their parents, well, see, the family is real, and it's right here in front of us, and it's how we live and come to be. And when you start thinking about that, you're on your way to God. And in other words, the abolition of the real is the source of the despotism that's creeping over us.
Larry, what do you make of the fact that young men increasingly agree with you, and the young women are moving away from that? There's a generational split. What do you make of that?
Well, I work in a weird world, and we have the same number of girls and boys at Hillsdale College, and we have the same size pools, and we have the same academic qualifications. Statistically, the pools are indistinguishable. And then the girls show up and they do a little better than the boys, because boys are boys, And Like one of the reasons I used to marvel at that and laugh about it. And you know, boys need a lot of abuse, in my opinion. They need to be, you know, the idiot Johnny Burtka. How did that turn out when he was 19 years old, you know? Well, if the family breaks up, like girls, this is statistically true, and I just have anecdotes about this, but girls are resilient in family trouble. Because, you know, they've got, like a woman who doesn't have a baby is, you know, that they feel the loss of that, often, mostly. But to have a baby, because babies are hard, and they need help. If the family breaks down, where do they look for the help? Is it the state? And, you know, and I can, you know, I love 18 to 21-year-olds. That's my world. Well, I got graduate students too, but they're less interesting. More advanced and less interesting. But if boys find their calling in understanding their service, and that has to do with women. Mm-hmm. I have a thing that I say, and it's notorious. I've had strangers walk up to me and say, I've married a Hillsdale girl, and I know about the Hillsdale Promise. And what the Hillsdale Promise is, if you marry a girl from Hillsdale and you're bad to her, I will have you killed. Why? Because then all of a sudden, boys have something to do. And it's a life, right? And it's, you know, I had my 46th wedding anniversary the other day, and that woman is the most selfless, serving human being on earth. And she's a better person than I am. I find my civilization by serving her, right? And our children and our grandchildren. Well, I think it's something deep, right? Because, you know, and it sounds sexist, right? But because it is. But here's the point. Get married and have a baby, and your life will be different for the next 30 years at least. In fact, all of it will be different. And women bear the burden of that more than men. And so men need to be committed to that. I had a boy, I won't say his name, but he's a frat boy, and he was a good boy, good student. And, you know, if you get an admissions job at any college, Hillsdale College, it means you're pretty good, you know. 'Cause a lot of kids want to hang around for another year or two. And this boy was an admissions counselor, just been hired, and we're at senior dinner at my house. And he looks at Joe, was his name, and he looks up. If he watches this, he'll know who I'm talking about. And he said, I know what women want. And we're sitting there with 4 girls. You know? and I know what women want. He's married and got kids now. He said, I said, what do they want, Joe? And he said, they want a man who's a little risky. They want a man who's an adventurer. And I said, and the girls, you know, they just look at him like he's a fool, you know. And I said, yeah, Joe, that's very wise, isn't it? And he said, what do you think they want? I said, I know what they want. And he said, what? And I said, they want reliability. They want courage. They want faithfulness. They want steadfastness. And the girls all go, you know, like that, you know. I said, see, Joe, if you don't learn that, you're never going to get yourself a girl. Because they do want you. You do. In the women have to be very courageous. And they are by nature, by the way. I mean, it's just, when I married Penelope, my woman, she was graceful. I noticed she served others. She's very smart. I noticed that her flatmates in Oxford were taking advantage of her. And I thought, that's not right. And then I saw one day that she knew that, and she didn't mind. And I went, wowie, what a woman, you know. Then I thought, I'm going to take care of her. She works all the time, and she always has. Children, you know, we have 2,000 guests a year in our house, and she takes care of all that. And everybody loves her. There's more than one opinion about me about Hillsdale College, but everybody loves my wife, right? And some trustees came to me one day and said, you know, we think your wife should be paid. And I said, yeah, she won't want that. And they said, well, you know, we mentioned it to her. I said, you did? And they said, yeah. I said, she doesn't want that. And I said, no. And I said, they said, why? I said, you would be taking from her service. And anyway, she doesn't want to work for you guys. one of us is enough. See, marriage, what would it take away from my life to be deprived of that? You see, and that things start with that. And so the women, the men have to, there's a person who wanted me to ask, I have to be careful about this story, but he wanted me to ask Donald Trump, like I talk to him all the time, which I do not, to make a thing that they're going to build smaller. And I said, what? I said, so I'm to go tell him no to Donald John Trump. I'm going to go say, no, make it smaller. I said, you know, what? Well, then I find out, so there's a woman who works in the White House, and I said, I'll mention it to somebody. I'm not going to say it to him. And she said, that man spent 2 hours talking to him. I said, oh. He said, he didn't persuade him. And the thing is, whatever he's going to do, it's going to be great, by the way, whatever it is I'm talking about. And she said, this girl, a Hillsdale graduate, tougher than Johnny Burtka, whom I've known for the same amount of time, right? She said, tell him to man up. I said, quote you. She said, of course. So you see, women are tough, but it's their pitiful fate that they need us. And so we need to serve them. And then, you know, my father always said this, in my family, I decide the important things, and my wife decides the unimportant things, and she decides which is which. That's a marriage, right? So it's in that world. Because see, like you like to teach people to work with their hands. Not everybody needs to know the good, right? Everybody needs to know that. Not everybody needs to be a plumber, right? But everybody does need to know how to do stuff with their hands. That's right. I will tell you, I bought a Cybertruck. I like computers, and I just love that thing. And then I don't care about cars. I keep cars 10 years at a time, right? First time I've been excited about a car since my dad gave me an old Dodge Dart for graduating from high school. But I really like this truck. And then come to find out it's a little complicated to wash it. Oh. And so I've gotten into pressure washing. And I'm good at it. Okay, anybody watches this, come by on a sunny afternoon, I'll wash your car in 8 minutes. And it'll be really pretty. And I can do it. And I'm buying gear, you know. And now I'm buying Milwaukee tools. This is not meant as an advertising, but
you couldn't get a brand sponsor.
And there, you know, there are others, and they're good, but it's a system. And I don't need any tools. I have like 50 people on the maintenance crew, and they can fix anything, whereas I can fix nothing. And my wife likes to fix things. She's got tools. Now I've got me some tools. I'm going to start fixing things. But the competence of that is part of life, men and women. Everybody does need it. Like if you were starting a trade school and you weren't going to teach about the good, I would call you a fool. But you are going to teach about that. And so, you know, like the best employees at Hillsdale College are the maintenance workers. and by a lot. I mean, it's the faculty and I are agreed. One time somebody says, the vice presidents and the maintenance workers, they said, we don't really know the vice presidents. And I said, well, they're like the maintenance workers and different from you. And they say, how? And I say, they know how to do things.
Dr. I've been wanting to ask you about this because this is a thing that I get all the time where we've started an honors college. People come and study the liberal arts and to earn their bachelor's degrees, and also the skilled trades, right? To ultimately become a journeyman. And people will often say, wait, these are two dichotomous things, right? The life of the mind and the life of the hands are two separate things. And obviously there's many different ways that I respond to that. We need these workers. There's a huge leadership vacuum in these industries. I mean, massive ones. We talk about the quantity problem in the trades all the time, but the quality problem is far more severe. We need leaders in this area. But another thing that is often comes to my mind is that I don't think that we can actually be good at the liberal arts, like think well and come to more dynamic and subtle conclusions, if we don't first understand the manual arts. And the reason I say that is because when you're dealing with in the liberal arts, you're ascending to the understanding what a nature of a thing is, what the form of something is, what are its animating principles that ultimately enable it to get to where it should go, right? I mean, from the formal cause to the final cause, right? But the only way that we ever come to know what a formal cause is, like what its principles are, how it can operate, what its potencies are, how can it be actualized, is really through material. Forms are always and exclusively manifested in and through matter. And so we have to deal with material so that we might have a real relationship and experience with form. I mean, this is form. The only thing that we know of with form without matter is God, right? But even he, in the incarnation, took on matter, right? The Word became flesh so that we can come to know him in greater intimacy, right? And I worry, looking ahead these 10 years, to kind of bring the conversation back to what's going on, is that with the progression of this digital age, which seems to already almost perfectly have saturated everything, is going to be more catalyzed with AI. And so there's almost a need to double down on the manual arts so that people might have that true and genuine experience of matter, so that they can have then an analogous and proportional understanding of formal arts as well. What do you think about that?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes. So the most, if you work in a college, you have athletic awards banquets. They are interminable, and you have to go. And there was one at our Hillsdale Academy one time, and the most eloquent speech I've ever heard was by the local prosecutor, who was the soccer coach. And he stands up and he says, "I coach boys." He said, "Boys like wood. They like to cut it, they like to burn it, and they like to hit things with it." He said, "That's boys." So that's the truth in what you said. Now, the wisest man I ever met couldn't figure out how to ring a doorbell, and never did. His wife took care of everything around him, married 65 years. So he was an intensely impractical man in some important ways. On the other hand, he rode bicycles and raced them.
Well, but I think that's part of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, so we have bodies, and we have to live in the physical world. Just read the Platonic dialogues, They're always talking about the arts and how you do things, I mean, read the Oikonomicus by Xenophon, right? Mm-hmm. Xenophon was
that's a perfect example, actually.
Interesting Socrates student because he was a statesman and a warrior and a philosopher. Very interesting guy. And, like if you read The Education of Cyrus, you find out that he actually holds Cyrus in contempt, although it's not so clear at the beginning. And then in the memorabilia, he much more than in the Platonic dialogues, he lambastes the people who condemned Socrates to death. He was a practical man, right? Well, to understand that, the practical things, you have to understand them to live a good human life, no matter what you do. How much you need to cultivate the manual arts. Because everybody has to do it some.
That's right.
You got to open the car door. You got to ring the doorbell, which my teacher hardly could. But so we need a revival of doing things in America. That's certainly true. Yeah. I was going to say this other thing. My parents grew up on Depression-era farms in the hills of Arkansas. Very bad kind of farming. They're poor as church mice. And to them, the farm was a place of drudgery. And to me, it was a playground. And my grandfather spoiled me, let me do things that he would beat my parents and their siblings for, right? So to me, going to the farm was, rope the pig, try to ride the mule, drive the tractor. To them, slavery. Just, take 3 months off from school to make the harvest by hand. You ever pick cotton all day? I did a few times, right? It's not good. It's all automated now. So don't think that P.J. O'Rourke wrote a great sentence once. He said, if you imagine the 17th and 18th century as an age of peace and bucolic life, I have one word for you: dentistry. It's a pretty good line. But yeah, so my point is, I agree, and it's still true that the intellectual virtues are the highest virtues, and you don't want to go too far with that.
But that's not my point.
Corey in here.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Dr. Arnn something, so I'm glad I've been waiting. As we approach 250 years, I've been thinking about how we want to have this next 250 years. And so I've really been thinking about the community in which I live, especially since I'm walking across America. I get to see places like Newark, Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC, and I think about my home, Chicago, on the South Side, and my heart really, really breaks when I think about what's going on educationally with kids not being able to read. And I think that some of our leaders are so out of touch, and the progressive left has taken such root, and the woke ideology and the identity politics is embedded so much into our system and our community. I'm wondering, how do we even turn it around? How do we even head and chart down another path? And so I just wonder.
So first of all, black people have been the conscience of America. They're the people we wronged. And the greatest black leaders have reminded us of that and forgiven us. And, Frederick Douglass spoke on our campus twice. I just love that guy, And what the most reproduced photograph in the 19th century, the most photographed person in the night. There's a book from a guy at Harvard and a lady at Harvard and a man at Leicester University who did a book of 19th century political photography, and he says the most photographed man in the 19th century was Fred Douglass, and the most famous photograph of him, which is he kept on his visiting card, was taken in a building that stands at Hillsdale College, and he dressed to the nines. He looked beautiful, and he was very elaborate of speech, very smart, very reasonable guy. He wrote 3 or 4 autobiographies. And his function was to remind us who we are, and we can't do these things. And so the truth is, and this is why I admire you so much, because you put yourself to pain to demonstrate something, because you're reminding us we're all in this together. And my people have been wronged. You've been wronged twice, by the way, because this slavery was horrific. Now, the systematic destruction of the black family, which happened first, white family following, Hispanic too. The point is, he said it before, you're in a position to help lead us out of this. And it's so important that, you know, if we had just adopted the principles of the Declaration of Independence and lived pretty well under them for a long time, without the Civil War, without slavery, those principles would not have been revealed as deeply as they have been. Just think, you know, if you ever read the novel The Killer Angels, everybody ought to read that. I've read it 10 times, I think. It's a rare book that I finished it and immediately went back to page 1 and read it again. And the drama of it is, it revolves around especially Joshua Chamberlain, who was a heroic man from Maine. And he saved the Union on the 2nd of July, 1863, on Little Round Top. And he did it by, they deliver, in the novel, I'm not sure the story is exactly accurate because it's so good that only a novelist could make it this good. Reality is exemplified, but it's probably not ever quite this good. Anyway, there's a bunch of mutinous Maine regiment, and it's delivered to him as he's about to go marching up the hill toward Little Round Top. And it says they've mutinied and you can shoot them, but they're your problem. And so he feeds them, and then he gives them a speech. And the speech is in the novel. It's very beautiful. He says, I'm not going to shoot you, you're Maine men, he said. And I know you've got grievances, and I don't have time to hear them now. I know you've paid a big cost. I recognize it. Don't have time to talk about it right now. He says, I think the war might turn today. And we're working for a society where no one has to bow. Mm-hmm. And it's not kings, it's us. Earlier, they're on the march, and they encounter a wounded black man, and his wound is open. And so they see a wound against black skin, and they've hardly seen that, you know, black people in Maine, right? And they're all marveling at that and wondering what they think about that. You see, so in other words, black people look different. It's you know, you gotta, it makes you think, what then is the essentially human if it ain't skin color, which it cannot be, see? So the point is that drama, right? And then what happens is almost all of them join up in response to a speech about the Declaration of Independence 2 days before the anniversary. And they hold Little Round Top against overwhelming odds by the absolute skin of their teeth. You see, well, to produce that speech by Joshua Chamberlain, who, by the way, he was a rhetoric professor at Bowdoin College, and he applied for leave to go fight, and he was refused. So he was actually on academic sabbatical.
That's amazing.
And he would later win the Congressional Medal of Honor, and he was chosen by Grant to accept the Southern surrender at Appomattox. And he's a very great man. He was governor of Maine. He was, you know, president of Bowdoin College. in its better days. and you see, the intensity, because you adopt your principles and then they own you. And you have to try to live by them, you see. Well, our struggle to live by them is, and because black people have suffered, we've all suffered, right? We all suffer from this toxic set of doctrines so well described that will deprive us of our humanity if they go. Well, what has to happen is black people have to stand up, and white people too. But I think you personally, but I think black people in general are in a position to do that. And it can be inspiring. I mean, Frederick Douglass makes this, he spoke at Hillsdale twice. One of the times he had to be guarded, because if you go to Kentucky, not that far away, or Tennessee, not that far away, there were agents. The reason he went to London was there were agents looking to kidnap him, take him back to slavery. And so we had to guard him when he was on our campus. And in London, he wrote this big, elaborate thing, which is, by the way, not true, that the Constitution, that the 3 passages in the Constitution that bow to slavery, which never named the word slavery, Madison makes a point of that they didn't mean slavery. Because he loved the Constitution, as he was right to do, and he loved the Declaration of Independence, as he was very right, completely right to do. And so he wouldn't admit that that's what they were talking about. That's not a very good argument, but it's noble. Yeah, so that's what I think. I think. Remember, it is a wonderful time to be alive, isn't it? Because we're in a crisis here, and crisis means turning point. Which way are we going to turn? We get to live, who's the greatest generation? The answer is the greatest things that have happened in American history are the Revolution and the Civil War. And we got those problems again.
Corey, I'm curious, what are you seeing with the young men and young women coming to your church, coming to the community center? How have Josh was talking a lot about this guilt and innocence kind of being at the root, and once, with more progressive forms of Christianity, this was transferred to kind of a secular vision. I'm curious, how are young people sort of receiving the gospel? And then maybe even as you connect it practically, what are you trying to teach them in terms of work and vocation and how to use their hands, or how to, move forward in the world? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think he was on point when he was talking about the indoctrination and, of certain ideologies that have been so embedded into our kids. And it's given them an idea of being victims, the idea of losing any virtues. So it's very difficult to change that mindset, especially when they're coming from broken homes, and then they're leaving their broken homes and they're going to these broken school systems. And then by the time we get them, we're trying to put things back together. So what we're doing is we're trying to put in programs, whether it's trade school or a Christian school or mentoring. We're just trying to fill in the pieces, but ultimately, it's Jesus Christ. We believe that until we get Jesus into the heart of these young people, all of these things are not going to matter. And so for me and for the people connected to me and for our team, it's really about trying to get the message of Christ into their hearts. And if we can do that, accomplish that, then maybe we got a shot at all the other stuff. And so that's what we're trying to do. It's a very difficult, on the south side of Chicago. It's a vast missions field, and it has to be looked at as such. But because you're fighting so many things, but ultimately we got to get Jesus in the hearts.
The implication of God. So how does Aristotle get to God? It's sort of a process of elimination. this thing is good, and this thing is better. This lower thing is an instrument of it, and you're starting up a ladder. And then you get up very high on the ladder when you get to human beings, although way below the planets. And human beings are imperfect. And Jesus calls us to be perfect. What would that be like? You know, everybody wants to be like that. But before you can understand good, you have to understand perfect. You have to understand good. And Jesus is calling us up. And you know, we Christians believe he helps us. He will help us. But for somebody to want to help, you do have to tell them the good they get from it. Did you know Eloise Anderson? She used to work for me. She was a single mom, black woman from Toledo, who was the welfare director first for Tommy Thompson in Wisconsin and then Pete Wilson in California and Better Days in California. And she's the toughest lady I ever met. And she would lambaste me. She was my employee. You know, she said one time, she said, you think you understand the Intercity family? And I said, well, I don't know if I think that or not. She said, well, you don't. And I said, what don't I understand? She said, I've heard you say that there aren't any men around. But there are. They come into the house and take things away. And that's what boys see and girls see. And that's their model. She said, the men need to come around and help out. That's what they're supposed to do. She just, you know, she's a very severe woman too. She's still alive. She's very old now, but, that's the thing, you know, like, people want to be good. You know, first line of Aristotle's Ethics says, every thought, every inquiry, art, choice, and action seems to aim at some good. And it's beautiful to say so. And then the second chapter begins, there would need to be some highest good, or else it would be a regression. If there were two highest goods, then the lower goods would be contradictory of each other on some occasions, right? So the truth is, isn't that the path of evangelizing? Everybody wants to be good. You know, murderers. You know, they back in the day, Nightline, that guy Ted Koppel spent a week on death row in a Texas prison, talking to people every night for a week. And they all made claims about justice. They said, I didn't do it, or I did it, but I was provoked. Somebody did worse and not getting as bad as I get, right? None of them said, I'm a low dog and I'm getting what's coming to me. Mm-hmm. See, they were all placing themselves in the right. And it was plaintive because in this particular prison, the way they keep prisoners from being violent with each other is they simply isolate them. And that's a miserable existence. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they don't get to talk to anybody. And so they're suffering, right? And the point is, every one of them was making a claim about the good. And, you know the inner city and I don't, but I think you start there. And then Jesus is this picture of the perfect who offers to help you and can.
Josh and Jeremy, shifting gears a little bit, we've talked before, especially Josh and I, about sort of the need for an American canon, you know, of books to kind of shape, you know, not only philosophy, literature, history, other things. I'm wondering if you could maybe both talk about, you know, what was education like at the time of the founding, especially if we think about the American founders? And then what would you say was the peak or the high watermark of, when American education was going well? What did it look like? Obviously, we know that when it got to the progressive era, it took a turn. But to you, where was the pinnacle, and what do we need to recover?
I'm going to guess it's somewhere in the 19th century. I'm very interested in looking at college curricula from the 19th century. Something clearly happened when the progressives took over, John Dewey. But I think there was also, I speak as a political theorist, there was a renaissance, I think, with the great books programs in the early part of the 20th century. And I think that happened in part because, not always a fan of Rousseau, but I think he got this right. Without war, there would be no history. When your country is plunged into war, you have to ask the question, what exactly are we fighting for? And the great books programs really emerged. You can't understand them except with respect to World War I and World War II. And I come out of that tradition. I was a student of Allen Bloom at Chicago. And my view is one of the great questions we have ahead is, what is the basic unit of knowledge? And I'm very worried. We've talked about moving from analog to digital. The attention span of our students is collapsing to zero. And I find even at Georgetown that my students are barely reading. They're certainly not reading books. So I think one of the questions in front of us is it the case that we are going to die on the hill of the belief that the book is the basic unit of civilization? And we're tempted to think, well, it's the podcast now. But podcasts can only be a supplement to deep knowledge. And maybe as the universities are falling apart and falling into identity politics, we have to step outside and do podcasts and what you're doing at ISI, try and teach young people who are not being taught, and with what you're trying to do with classical education. But I think we have to decide what the basic unit of civilization is. And my view, and it's not just my view, is that yes, events happen, but ultimately what we come to think of them is shaped by the canonical books that we think give voice to the events. And the conservative movement emerged really because Buckley and Kirk and others gave us a canon of books, and ISI is instrumental in doing this. Here are the books that we need to have in order to have a conversation about what's happening around us. We have lost that, and frankly, the people who have done most damage are the ones who are teaching it, because we're no longer teaching books, we're teaching little fragments of books, survey classes. So I think we need to return to a full-on understanding that we have to embrace the book, and of course there's the book of books, right, the highest of books. But I think, one way of getting to that book is to have lesser conversations, and they're not really lesser, but lesser about Plato and Aristotle and the rest. And that's my worry, is that there can be no higher education unless we agree that the book is the basic unit of civilization. And I'm not seeing people stand up and do that.
That's so good. So you're torn. 4 years is not enough, right? No, nor is 80. And so, we have a Constitution reader at my place. And that works, and because you can get key documents. Political documents tend to be shortish, and you can get key documents from the American Revolution and the Civil War and the Progressive Era. A literature course is very difficult because a work of literature is a whole thing, and extracts don't work, and so you're always torn. But what you said. You need to pick, Professor Jaffa told us, I tell the students at Hillsdale now, you should pick 3 books. You shouldn't pick 10 or 100. You should pick 3. And all you have to do is seek the word great. Because if you're serious about that, you're bound to find a really good book. And the great books are microcosms of the world. And you're going to resolve, by the time you're 60, to know as much as possible about those 3 books. And if you know one such book, everything else will become meaningful to you. And he proposed that as one of the best speeches I've heard him give. he proposed that as the honors program in the Claremont colleges. Of course, they're so far from that now that there are no books. And he said, you can't read 100. It's not enough time. But 3, and pick your 3. And then I say that in the capstone course every year to the seniors, and they're galvanized by it. And then they want me to name their 3.
Yeah.
And I can name my 3, but
What are 2 and 3 on your list?
well, one of them's a cheat because I know quite a lot about Winston Churchill. I didn't quite understand how hard that would be when I started. He did live so dang long and did so dang much and wrote so dang much that, wow, what? But, it's a long time now, so I kind of know it. And then I know a lot about Shakespeare. And that's because Professor Jaffa was a literature student at Yale. And his real love was that he and Ellen Bloom wrote the Shakespeare's Politics. They sort of opened that genre, right? And the best courses he taught, the ethics is a rival, but he would teach Shakespeare, and he would bring back in those days, a phonograph record of a great play, and well acted, right? And he would play it in class, and he'd pick up the needle and talk about it. And here's Macbeth. Macbeth was Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln's favorite play, and they both had it memorized.
Wow.
And Lincoln, in Lincoln's day, there were copies of Shakespeare's. They weren't codified, and so you get an edition, and it would be different from another edition. And Lincoln would have several editions, in the White House included. And he'd take them down and he'd point out the differences. And he'd say, this one is better because fits, he was a critic, right? Anyway, Macbeth is in the chamber about to murder his kinsman to get his job, his house guest, right? And he's imagining the angels above crying out against the deed, and the demons below calling for the blood of Duncan. And Professor Jeff picked up the needle and said, does this man live in a richly populated moral universe? I remember that till the day I die. Well, that's the point. Yeah, sorry, I talked too much, but that's, a finite task. Pick a book, make it good, and come to know it. You'll have to read it 50 times. And it will become your companion night and day. And we talk about the core curriculum. We have a big core curriculum at Hillsdale, and that's important. But if you had to pick, take a course in every fundamental field, which is what the course means. There's some things that every human being needs to know. You should have a course in them, right? If you had to pick that versus one great book, you'd pick the one great book.
Where did we get, I guess, the sort of the 4-year, multi-course kind of educational model, as opposed to, if instead of going to college, like hung out with Josh for 4 years and read Plato, Augustine, and Tocqueville,
There you go.
right, and met every Friday, and would that have been better? Is there a way ought we to try to recover something like that right now, or is the 4-year core the magic?
Plato's Academy.
Yeah.
And hope we get Aristotle for a student. No, that when it works, Hillsdale College works pretty well. It's cool, and I've watched it. I watched something change. It's the most beautiful spectacle I've seen in my professional life. Kids think that what they're doing is good for its own sake, and they're dutiful about it. They're kids, but that if you get that spirit, then, I have a colleague, David Whalen, he's a John Henry Newman scholar, big Catholic guy. He's very wise, and he, is a student of the liberal arts, anyway, so he dragoons me into teaching the senior capstone course for all the seniors, and so I do, and I finally figured out how to make it work, because I finally got it. Seniors don't want me to get them in a room, big room, and rehearse what they've been learning. They're too old for that now. They're not freshmen anymore. But I figured out the respect in which they are freshmen. And I start by telling them that. You guys are freshmen again now. You're about to go do something you never did before. And just like when you came here 4 years ago, and you're excited about that and worried about it. And so the subject we're going to discuss is how do you live well for the rest of your life? And they're questions. I make them send me questions, so there's 400 of them, and I do it half of them one semester and half of them the other. So I got a lot of questions, right? But they're grouped very tightly around how do I keep my friendships and how do I keep my education alive? And the vocational things they come up, they're worried about AI, right? And I always say, they can't possibly change anything, right? Because how are you going to make a living? The answer is you're going to find a way to be useful to somebody else. Nobody's going to hire you because you're pretty. They're going to hire you because they need help. Your mission is to find out what help they need and give it to them. And so that's just the same, And there'll be something for you to do. You just got to go find it. But then after that, how do you keep alive the most beautiful things that human beings can know? And the answer is you have to recur to them frequently.
Johnny, it's always struck me how some of the greatest minds in American history, from Ben Franklin, Abigail Adams, Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, spend almost no time in any kind of a formal school. They were self-educated, and I've always seen that as uniquely American. When I think about that high watermark of
Churchill,
half American.
Yeah, well, there you go.
But his story and Lincoln's story are just the same.
Okay.
Sorry, but I interrupted.
Yeah, but I think how do we recover that? It was a culture. I think of Ben Franklin figuring out that he could trade meals for books. He just had to eat less to be able to buy the books. How do we recover a culture like that that's hungry for knowledge?
Well,
That's the question.
That cannot die. What is the first line of Aristotle's Metaphysics? The human being, I like the Joe Sachs translation. The human being stretches himself out to know. We're made to know. We're the only things that can. And so, of course we want to know. And, by the way, just saying that sentence awakens a thirst for knowledge in everyone who hears it. And so we just got to talk about it. Remember, so my reading of what went wrong is, you used the word dominion before, a dangerous word, right? It's a power word. You were talking about the dominion of somebody else, not us, right? But then it's not. But if you just read the progressives who just brought German historicism to America, right? We can make everything better if we use science and forget about the question of better and worse. And that won't work, right? It's a contradiction on its face. And they disguise it. I once was punishing a young man. And I said, I'm so mad at you right now. Tomorrow, I want you to come in. I'm going to give you an exam on this essay by John Dewey. If you don't pass it, I'm going to flunk you. And he said, I can read the essay. I said, you haven't read it yet. I don't think you'll like it. Because it's hard, right? It's this turgid, systematic, new vocabulary that he invents. And it's disguising the fact that don't ask the question why. You see? And that's the question we want. And we're made to want it. Every time we make a choice, it's a choice about better and worse. And so, surely, well, first of all, I assert that cannot die. It can be suppressed for a long time. But even then, I mean, this revival, I mean, all of us see signs of revival. Isn't that a glorious thing?
It is.
5 years ago, did you? I've not ever been pessimistic because I work in this college that does pretty well, and it's inspiring things happen all the time, and it's just a marvel to watch them. But looking out at the world, read the paper, there's some good things happening now, and violence lurking all the time, and you're so right, Josh. It ain't gonna go away fast. But that doesn't mean it can't be beaten.
Corey has to leave for an appointment now, so thanks so much for joining us today, and good luck on your walk across America.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, since starting CLT, I've probably toured 100 or more classical schools, classical Christian schools, Catholic schools. And one of the schools I've been most impressed with was a school that Dr. Kevin Roberts started. John Paul the Great.
I've been there before in Louisiana. Yeah.
Yes, and it's one of the few schools I've started where the students, it's very Benedictine. They are tilling the soil. They're picking weeds. They're feeding animals, and it has 20% of the young men go off to seminary to become priests. It is one of the most fruitful, but I think that is, you know, connecting the work of the hands, what Jacob is doing at the College of St. Joseph the Worker, with the life of the mind. I mean, we're so, you know, starved for this. And you know, for me, formatively, the richest time of my life was when I was living in Alaska, working in the slime lines, and I would clean fish all day. And then I would read in the land of the midnight sun until, you know, midnight or 1 a.m. And it was that balance that we've so lost, I think. And I think that's what we need to get back to keep this movement going.
Yeah, I mean, and ultimately that's what we're about at ISI. But there is certainly the same, I mean, the ISI students are, I think, more hungry certainly for religious faith, but also for learning, because they're in such arid environments on their college campuses. But nevertheless, we still deal with the same challenges of writing ability has decreased, attention span has decreased. And I think there is an imperative to create spaces where people can actually have stillness and where they're not sort of...
Kids need manual labor for the same reason they need sports, by the way. Sports is really good. They should suffer, learn to suffer. The land of the midnight sun is also the land of the noonday darkness. They don't advertise that as much.
Jacob, I'm curious, if you're looking at sort of America and the tradition of learning and higher education in America, where do you see things going wrong, or what? And then why is what you're putting forward sort of a corrective to that?
You know, I don't know if I could pick any one spot, but, you know, I do think about founding of Cornell or University of Michigan with this hard and fast focus on production and pragmatism, that we're losing the idea that the search for wisdom is nourishing for the soul, and that we need to move from the speculative and theoretical and the abstract to the practical as fast as we possibly can. You know, I identify that as giving up on actually the moral or excuse me, not the moral virtues, but the intellectual virtues too quickly in a way that will never allow us to ever even develop the moral virtues. What we're trying to do is, so it's funny to say that, and then also have a college that also is teaching people the manual arts, and in part because we think that actually doubling down on the higher education is essential. This is not a college that we founded for the sake of those who really ought not to be going to college. I completely agree, Josh, with that assessment. We are doing a massive injustice to people telling them that they ought to go. We have to have college still, but just for the few that ought to go, I'm trying to find a way of ensuring that there is a financially viable path for them to keep that alive. But by separating distinctly in the curriculum the liberal arts from the manual arts, we're able to allow both of them to become more themselves and then be married together in a way that's more separated. So we're not saying, we have to merge these things together as if they were one effort, right? Which is a lot of what we've seen. You just go to college for engineering, or you go, just for, some pragmatic end, right? That's very far from what we're doing. It's like marriage. Like when a man marries a woman, he becomes more masculine. When a woman marries a man, she becomes more feminine. Their differences are illuminated and made more glorious by the two, and that's precisely what we're going to do. So we prefer the CLT. We think he's done a phenomenal job. Our average CLT score clocks in just at the second year of our existence at the 92nd percentile. Like, these are bright kids that are determined to make a genuine impact on the world, but only after and during this continual and endless process of coming to sit at the feet of authority in docility and with discipline, in contradistinction to, just coming to an average university and being exposed to the most boring and the most insidious forms of conformity.
Can I push this just for a second? This is, I think, dead on. So, I've had a 40-year career, but honestly, the last 15 or 20 years, I left what I call the library science of political theory, and I've gone off to build universities based on my knowledge of Tocqueville in the Middle East twice. But the genius of political theory was not just that it was responding to war, but I think Strauss, Arendt, whatever their differences, Vogelin, the greats in political theory, they came out of World War II. And so there was a kind of method of correlation. It was the crisis of modernity and the great books. And you learn more, this is exactly your point, you learn more about the crisis of modernity the more you read Plato and Aristotle. You learn more about Plato and Aristotle the more you think about the crisis of modernity. This is what political theory was. This is the genius of political theory, which separates that activity in our field from what happens in philosophy departments and history departments. And the decay of this took the following form. Instead of looking at real world events and trying to make sense of them in terms of the great books, the secondary literature develops, and then the tertiary literature develops. And so now you have what I call political theory library science, where we're just looking at arguments about arguments about arguments, and we've lost sight of the original task, which is to juxtapose the crisis of our times, and it's always a new one, with the great works. And that's the only way, in my view, that we can revitalize the great books. We can't just teach them and teach the secondary and tertiary literature. We have to ask the question, how do these books tell us about our world right now? Which I take to be what you're doing with Aristotle when you're doing the senior seminar. That's what we have to do. And I think our kids, they're hungry for that. They don't want to just study the secondary, tertiary literature. Their question is, how does this book bear on what I see out there? And we failed to do that. And the revitalization of higher education has to do exactly that. You're doing a version of it. When I go off and I build a university, I'm doing the same thing. I couldn't have done it without living Tocqueville for 30 years. Right. So that's what I think political theory has to do. That's what higher education has to do. And we've lost that because we've become research oriented, which really means getting lost in the literature. Yeah. It's a terrible problem.
It's an old joke. Socrates questioned the opinions of the Athenians, and so do philosophers today.
That's great.
Yeah, Strauss and Arendt studied with a Nazi, right? That's a crisis in their lives. And
a comment if I could about Hillsdale College. I started teaching in inner city New York, And I would ask the students, what are we doing here? What's the point of school? Every student, unanimous, to get a better job. I went to a affluent suburban public school, same answer, right? To get a better job. That's the telos. They've bought into this misguided, impoverished telos for education. At Hillsdale, they learned something much richer, much more beautiful, much more timeless. Paradoxically, they make the best workers. 25% of CLT employees went to Hillsdale College. If they have Hillsdale behind their application, we'll find a way, we want to bring them in. I find that so interesting, that their education has not been aimed at jobs, yet they make the best employees. I wonder if you could offer some insight.
Well, they don't. It's funny, because so I've only had one job in a college in my life, so I don't know much about it.
What was that? No.
And so I show up, and the culture was mixed. And a lot of the questions were, what's the good of all this? And then the seniors are all worried how they're going to get a job. I never encounter either of those things anymore. If you ask senior year is a big year. Freshman year is the most fun year because they're so easy to torture. But the seniors, they pine a bit. They're ready to get on. But what they're not worried about much is making a living. And they're worried about keeping the good of this alive. And they are workers. We recruit like the Marine Corps. This is hell, you probably don't want to do it. And the more we say that, the more applications we get. And that's a big change, right? That was, first year I was at Hillsdale College, we were admitting students after August the 1st to fill up the class. And now we accept 19%. But that's just because we figured out what they need and offered it to them. And what they need is pain, challenge. And they show up, and so that, first of all, it's hardly fair. It's drawn from a population of people who want that. And so, yeah, sure, they'll be good workers. And they get a chance to grow, and that's what they want. Just like, my wife is a gardener, English woman, right? She can grow anything. But she doesn't think she makes it grow. Like a phrase that she'll look at it and she'll say, I wonder what it needs, which is different than the question, what will I do to it? See, it has a life. It is, and so I have become more radical than I was before, and I was very radical before. That you shouldn't, I don't want to be in a position of making anybody do anything they haven't volunteered to do. Employees, students, everybody, you got to sign up. It's in you. You got to do it. You want to do this? This is the job, and you don't get conflict. I mean, you get conflict all the time, of course, because work is hard and everybody disagrees about everything. But we agree about the end. And then that means the conflicts are not fundamental. So, yeah, I think that's, they respond to the call of the good. Of course they do. That's what they are.
I was talking with one of our alums who went to Washington College or Washington University in St. Louis, and we were talking about at first, how Hillsdale's changed since I started there when I was in 2008, and I'm saying, they probably party less now than they did in 2008 because it was still, in the this was 8 years in, it was still transitioning to I think what it is now in terms of I don't think I would get in if I applied today, the state, but he
shaking his head.
Yeah, definitely not.
You'd probably, if we didn't let you in.
Yeah.
First of all, just think of the delight we would lose.
Yeah.
We'd probably still let you in.
So, anyways, he was saying, I went to the kids didn't party at my college either, and I was like, well, all right, this is sort of like an elite university, what do you mean? And he goes, they're terrified to socialize in groups of any significant size. So kids never drink together at a party or something, like you would imagine at a big, school, because they have such a professional mindset of like they have to check all the boxes to get into the professional degree program, that they either drink alone in their room or do drugs alone in their room, or they might go out with two people to get a drink at a bar. And he also said in the fraternities, they're all doing drugs, but it's, I don't believe any drugs are okay, but they're not doing drugs to whatever, have a dance party together. They're doing isolating drugs that make them essentially solitary, opioids, who knows what it is that they're doing. But he just described this total hellscape where there is no healthy socialization because they're all too afraid about climbing the ladder. So, yeah.
So Justin Jackson and Steve Smith, two of my best professors, and I have just formed the Committee for Fun. And we're hosting film series because we discovered to our horror last year that the students at Hillsdale College don't know the films Rocky.
Okay.
So last year we had a Rocky season.
Nice.
And this year we're doing Bill Murray, that philosopher. and Justin, who teaches medieval English and Dostoevsky, and
My only
Stephen,
Hillsdale College.
who's a Dante guy and a Shakespeare guy, right? We understand the culture, right? If you don't know Bill Murray, you're not an American. We're thinking up food. So I'm the president, right? So I can do fancy things. So the film series are very popular, and there's a cuisine to go along with each film.
Okay.
So we're working out our Bill Murray cuisine right now.
Wow. What was the Rocky one? Eggs in a mug?
Philly cheesesteak.
All right, there you go.
The problem of isolation, I mean, we all know Tocqueville saw this first in the 1830s when he came to America. And I told my students the other day, I said, when I got here at Georgetown 32 years ago, I saw boys and girls holding hands. And then I realized in the early 2000s, and since then, they don't hold hands anymore because they're so frightened of any sort of formality and protocol. Are you going with a person? And their answer is, well, it's complicated. Meaning they don't know if they're in, they're out. They don't know if they can be boyfriend, girlfriend. They don't know if they can be dating. The formality and protocols between boys and girls have completely broken down. And so since 2000, they go in groups, but they're anonymous. And I saw just last month, I saw a boy and a girl holding hands for the first time in 20 years. And I told my students that, and it was very strange. The girls were kind of horrified. Like, why would you date? And the boys, because there is really a generational shift now. I think the boys are much more traditional. But here you have these two quivering creatures, one a testosterone-based life form and another an estrogen-based life form, who neither understand themselves nor one another. And as Tocqueville says, all the formalities, the decent drapery of life, to cite Burke, all of this has been stripped away. And so how do they gather together? And here, Bloom was crazy, but his best book wasn't The Closing of the American Mind. It was Love and Friendship. And the one thing I really learned in graduate school was you find a few people, and these are your lifelong companions, and you will read books, the 2 or 3 books together. And that's the highest form of friendship. And I think in higher education, we have to always remind them that the longing for the good, the true, and the beautiful, held by a few people together, is the most powerful glue that will hold you together for the rest of your life. That's not what we're inculcating in our academic world.
Aristotle never calls justice beautiful, but he calls friendship that repeatedly and says that it binds the city together. Justice is not beautiful because it's so wrapped up in resolving things that have gone wrong, whereas friendship is entirely about things that go right. And
where there's friendship, there's no need for justice.
That's exactly what came to my mind too.
That's right.
But somehow we have to, thinking ahead, I think that's got to be part of the plan too, is to seed this in our students. And some of this is by example. So when we have professors talking, disagreeing and yet being friends, that's incredibly powerful. But sounds like Hillsdale is very different, but the centrifugal forces are so powerful in the university. It leads to isolation among professors, and we're not modeling that very well at all, I think, across the country.
Jacob, to kind of wrap things up, you've talked in the past at length about kind of the significance of the incarnation and sort of changing, how we understand kind of the work of our hands, but how we can also bring together kind of the life of the mind and the life of the body. So I'm wondering, maybe as we kind of look forward to the future in America and the type of education that can get us to a more virtuous, prosperous, healthy society, I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that significance of that incarnation in your understanding for the revolution that it brought to education.
Yeah, gladly. So, I think I'll give this as a preface first and maybe go off from here, is that if you look at the ancient world, all the pagans hated work, right? I mean, this is most famous perhaps in the Atrahasis, where, if you're a good Christian, growing up in a nice household, your parents will probably open up the Bible to you and they'll read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But if you were a nice Babylonian boy 4,000 years ago, the equivalent of the Bible was opened up and read to you. It was, when the gods, rather than men, bore the load and took on the drudgery. I mean, this was an original curse, work was, that ultimately the solution that the gods came up with to get out of labor was creating man, right? And that became their lot instead. The mythology and even the cosmology of the Greeks was very different than the Mesopotamians, but there is still that disdain for work. I mean, Aristotle obviously famously writes this at the beginning of the Politics, that the life of a craftsman is inimical to the life of virtue. And there was even Greek city-states. Athens, for some time, though they changed the laws, it's kind of an interesting story. But Thebes, Sparta, that had rules on the books forbidding citizens to engage in manual labor. And the Romans more or less took this on. Cicero pretty much plagiarizes Aristotle. It wasn't plagiarism back then, by saying that the life of a tradesman was ignoble and that there was nothing respectable about a workshop. So the Greeks hated labor, and I'll go off on that and say that there is this tragedy that there was even a philosophical tragedy scene about it, and labor, that is the transformation of the world.
The arts are good, but they're instrumental because they produce something, right? They're for the thing they make, but that doesn't mean they're not good.
No, but that's absolutely true. But that's not the extent of their arguments. Right, and we can get into that if you'd like, but I think what we find in the incarnation is that in this Greco-Roman world that had a disdain for labor, the Word became flesh and spent most of the years of his life at a carpenter's bench. And then later on, when you see not just St. Paul seeing tent making as an instrumental cause of his missionary activity, but then you later on in the monasteries of St. Benedict, when he gives his rule and he gives his motto, ora et labora, he's not just saying that labora is good because of what it provides instrumentally, but because in work as well, that is a clear path by which we come to know and experience the world's creator and redeemer. And that innately good aspect of work is something that the Christian tradition later explored and found to be beautiful. And I think as we in America are so obsessed with productivity and efficiency and effectiveness, which is really why we created AI as well, right? That we need to see that the redemption of work is actually in the process itself and what we are giving, what we're prudentially offering one another, that our relationships may become richer and more divine, and not just a way of having more stuff. That I see is the real nuance where we need to get to. And work.
Jacob, a question for you. I'm thinking St. Jose Maria Escriva, founder of the University of Navarra, founder of Opus Dei, of course, the great 20th century saint who kind of developed a theology of work. I think right now we're maybe on in the beginning of this crisis with AI and rethinking the future of work. And I think of dev teams right now where people are realizing sometimes 2 or 3 developers can do the work of 15 or 20. I'm wondering if that theology of work is into this classical renewal movement in education. Are your students coming in, or your freshmen coming in, thinking about kind of the meaning of work in this way from the schools that they're coming from?
You know what? Yes, they are starting to think about this. How far they've gotten is, relatively unimpressive. But the fact that they are beginning to be contrarian enough to say, no, I want something that is good. I want to put myself into something that is different. That is already a philosophical act that they're making, of considering what is on offer and saying, I want to explore wisdom in my life in a different mode. When St. Thomas says that the opposing vice to the virtue of prudence is prudentia carnis, right? He says it's just the strategic attempt to get more things of the flesh, right? And it's the same modus operandi for us, right? You look at the world, its order and its patterns, and the prudence that is a virtue, rather than the prudence that is a vice, you are looking and saying, how can I transform this in order that people might come to greater flourishing, right? Versus the consideration of prudence, which is a vice, carnis, of the flesh, is rather, how can we produce more things? And hopefully, indirectly, though, we might have greater human flourishing. But that's not the principal aim. That's not the principal focus. And that, I think, is such a fine but essential, fundamental shift in our way of thinking.
I want to say a word for the Greeks here.
All right, let's get into it.
We liberal arts nerds are given to the idea that any commercial or vocational life is low, and it is so. Those passages where Aristotle talks about the mechanic and the lower life, the point there is that philosophy is for a few. It's a very radical thing to devote yourself to the truth. Simply, it's and it's rare thing. And it's the ultimate thing for our lives. It's the thing that's closest to God in the Greeks. But that doesn't mean that the arts are low. It's
well, lower, certainly. No doubt about that.
What?
Lower, certainly.
Yeah, but lower doesn't necessarily mean
debased.
Yeah, it doesn't. I don't think it's debates. It's the corruption of anything. But there's a.
But to say that the life of a tradesman is inimical to the life of virtue suggests something more.
It's inimical to the life of contemplation, which is the highest life.
I think one other just amazing turn that I see in redemption. I don't say this in criticism of Aristotle. I mean, we have our philosophical language principally from him. We're only able to speak well for him. I think that it is providential that we went from the Hebrew to the Hellenistic so that we might be able to articulate and describe what's actually happened in salvation history and to compel it forward. We couldn't do that with Aristotle. So
he does inimical to the life of virtue.
Politics 1.7.
Complete virtue, maybe, right? But when he talks about slavery, he says it's wrong unless, in captivity maybe, but you got to give them a chance for their freedom, because you're not to use a human being as if it were an animal or a dog. And so it's actually a condemnation of slavery. So I think we have to resist. So first of all, I salute your statement. You don't want students, you don't want the young to grow up and think that the people who make the stuff they use and the people who sell them things and all that those are low people. You don't want that. And doing some work with your hands is good to teach you how the world functions. But you also want them to think, I mean, if you're in a college, right, you want them to think there are some beautiful things to know in these here books, and your life will be enriched in a different and better way than any other way.
I think
by learning them.
that the move to just saying that there's some not meant for college and just into the trades and then giving up on their intellectual life is a tragedy beyond tragedies. No, I didn't founded a trade school. I founded a college. You know, this is something that I hold dearly and want to preserve. So let that not be a mistake in interpretation. I think, though, that Christianity took what is beautiful and marvelous about the Greek tradition, but also needed to speak into the philosophical world, revealed truths that helped clarify the thinking of philosophy, and that one of those things is the consideration of the dignity of man, and that slavery is actually not an inherent state of man, right? So it's not just discerning who is a slave and who's not, but recognizing that we have to pull everyone up into the life of freedom, and part of that is by giving them thoughts that they would otherwise not have, like ideas and modes of thinking that they otherwise would not have. I think that the understanding of virtue is another one of these shifts, where it's not just the ability to be most powerful in yourself, but be most fundamentally relational with others. That is another one of these shifts. I think, see also kind of even the final cause is the way that the Christian tradition uses that is equivocal to the way that Aristotle did, insofar as it's not just the fulfillment of potencies into act, as you find in Metaphysics 12, but rather that it is that divine dance of the entrance and the full participation of the Holy Trinity that is so beautiful.
There's a good movie called The Duelist, and it's about the French Revolution and two guys who repeated duels through it, but there's a figure in it.
Oh, so it's like actually swords, you're saying?
Yeah. It's a good movie.
That's
and
clever.
I think it's Ridley Scott. But there's a figure in it that was very arresting to me. One of the old aristocrats, who's come through the French Revolution and survived, what he does in his age is he becomes a boot maker. And he makes these really beautiful boots. And I think that's what you're talking about. He doesn't make them to make a living. They're beautiful things, and he makes them. And that's high art. Right? It's just boots, but they're pretty cool boots. And he does you a great favor if he offers to make you some boots. And that's the difference between, like, the purpose of art is production, right? But the purpose of fine art is an exception,
Right.
Because and there is. I mean, look, I grew up in Northeast Arkansas, poor people, right? Everybody's a worker, and if you're not a worker, that's the worst thing in the world. That's lazy. That's about as bad a thing as you can say about a person. Kids they have to work. They need to work, and Milwaukee tools are pretty cool.
Life of the mind, life of the hands. I actually think that we need to cut it a different way. I think you used the word competence a long time ago, and that's my magic word. Mm-hmm. My view is there are competencies in terms of liberal arts fluencies and competencies in terms of your hands. And the grand experiment we have embarked on, without anybody really commenting on it, is that we are moving from the analog world of friction, of incarnation, to the digital world. And the grand hope is that the digital can be a substitute for the analog. And this language of supplements and substitutes is first worked out in Plato's Republic, when he's talking about the two kinds of doctors. And my view is that we really need to start thinking about whether AI and the world that we've built, which is basically a world where human competences have been rendered as algorithms, software algorithms to run universities, to run businesses. And I think the great experiment we're performing will ultimately fail because digital can be a supplement to analog, but not a substitute for it. China has decided they're going to move full on digital. Right. And our mistake is that we're going to copy them. And the American genius, if you follow Tocqueville, it's this amazing section toward the end of Volume 1, where he says the Americans have democracy because they have this vast reservoir of invisible competence, which isn't just book learning. It's this hands-on experience. And then he introduces Volume 2 with this philosophical method, which is going to undermine all this competence because we're going to want to render everything in terms of, our term now would be digital information, render everything as information. And not everything can be understood as information. So Tocqueville sees this. We're embarking on this 21st century experiment. It has massive implications for university life too. So what is the competence of a book reader? Well, it's not clear that there's a measurable outcome from it, but we know it when we walk into a room and we're able to convey something to students and they get the aha and you can't measure it. So my biggest worry going forward is that we're going to carry on with this experiment of what I call digital substitutism. So instead of you and I learning the books, we'll just go to an AI source and say, well, what did Plato say in the Republic? That's going to be the real destruction. Mm-hmm. What we have to understand is that human competence, either in terms of reading books or working with your hands, is an analog phenomena, and that the digital can supplement, but we're presuming that we don't need to do that. And so that's what's destroying universities. The grand dream of the digital elites is we won't need plumbers because everything, we'll have these houses which are run on the network of things. Is that the right term? Is that it? The network of Internet of Things. And so we will not need to have any kind of human competences at all. And I don't use the word human flourishing, but in a way I'm pointing to it. I don't think human beings are built to be other than competent creatures. Mm-hmm. And the grand experiment we're performing, both at the level of thought and at the level of action, is that we're moving toward digital substitutism. This to me is ultimately the greatest threat.
Oh yeah,
I completely agree.
And see that's wise. So I agree with that. I agree with that.
I thought I could break the Gordian knot between the two.
Yeah. All right. Well, you did it. Yeah, you broke it.
Okay. On that note, we'll wrap up.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Arnn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Project Cosmos, Conversations on the Future of Civilization, which is a production of ISI, the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. If you're a student, professor, or lifelong learner who wants to get more involved with ISI, visit isi.org or follow us on social media to learn more about our educational programs that teach the foundations of Western and American civilization and what it means to be a great and good man or woman today. That's isi.org, or like and follow us on social media. Thank you.